I would like to share a few of my personal heroes. But not just any heroes. These are the ones that I might find myself wary of mentioning in conversation. The gritty few who helped shape the thinking part of who I am. The teachers. Nobody has a problem talking about their heroes if they are intelligent, capable, and in good standing in their society. On one side, we have sports stars, musicians, and actors who are celebrated for what they bring to the world of art, regardless of the fact that many of them are complete morons incapable of any real advice. On another side, we have those such as the Dalai Lama or Gandhi who might conjure thoughts of spirit or heart. But then there are the outliers, or outcasts as you might define them. Psychologists and doctors who took a lot of acid back in the 1960s, or on the other side of the coin, straight-edge Freemasons who preach good hygiene and avoiding rock and roll music. But we'll get to that another time. So who are the few people that inspired me to write this? I will start with none other than Mr. Alan Watts himself. Alan Watts was born in 1915, and he died in 1973. In his life, he moved to the U.S. in 1938 and trained in Zen in New York City. He even became an Episcopal priest in 1945, but left in 1950 and moved to California, where he began sharing his thoughts in many books on Buddhism, eventually speaking and sharing his thoughts that Buddhism could be thought of as a form of psychotherapy. Many would consider that controversial, but to myself it makes more sense than I could begin to explain here. But the main thing Mr. Watts contributed was a cool, calm, and collected demeanor, and a knack for defining complicated ideas with a laugh and a good metaphor. When I had been studying these practices myself years ago, I found Alan to be a wonderful presenter, almost as if he was fit for the job of bringing Zen Buddhism to a Western audience, something that is not as easy as it may seem. One thing about Mr. Watts is many consider him to be, for lack of a better term, shallow. I'm not sure how else to put it. The fact that he joked a lot and laughed at himself, as well as his long pauses and riddles of language, lead many people to think he was a bit mad or slightly off balance. I would argue that this was his best trait, and what attracted me to his teachings in the first place. He was criticized for his alcoholism and is often ignored for the fact he had substance abuse issues. I find that to be too bad, because most great thinkers through history have had some kind of vice. When you see too deep into the illusion, it can be hard not to have many. After all, stability and spirit hardly go hand in hand. Some things are best spoken in poem, and he did a wonderful job at doing that. My next hero, whom is on the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, was Manley P. Hall. As long, dry, and slowly spoken his thousands of hours of lectures may be, his raspy message always fell on curious ears. I spent about a year consuming every one of his lectures at work on my headphones, or at home, or anywhere else I may have been. Manley Palmer Hall was born in 1901, and he passed away in 1990, after a long career of writing, speaking, and learning. He is controversial to many people, merely for the fact that he was a Freemason, something that never bothered me in the slightest. Manley Hall founded the Philosophical Research Society in 1934. He was best known for the book he wrote in 1928, called The Teachings of All Ages. It is a comprehensive work containing a vast amount of collected information about everything from secret societies to alchemy to the origins of symbolism and the zodiac. He spoke of ancient myths, of religions, and of societies long since past. He spoke of every past idea, every belief system, and the roots for all our dogma and speculation about life. In fact, his lectures were so varied that I find it difficult to even define him. That said, he dissected all religions down to their bare bones, and many people do not want to hear that their literal interpretations may be metaphors. So he was demonized quite literally as Illuminati, a demon, or a Satanist. Quite simply, he's either loved or hated. For the time I spent reading and listening to his material, I cannot say that I agree with every one of his assessments. Of course not. At times he had some very ridiculous ideas, such as rock and roll music being damaging to the psyche, or watching violence on the television or reading about it was somehow damaging to our souls. Silly, right? Well, actually, several years later I'm starting to see where he was coming from. Perhaps I'm getting too old, or perhaps too conventional. But for the time he lived, there were different values, and I can see how the modern world which was coming might scare someone such as himself. We now know that it is not just television and rock music that causes people to misbehave, but the message that the youth hears in many of the lyrics can be far from productive or respectable. I think we all remember listening and watching some absurd media when we were kids. He was only trying to protect the minds of the children, as well as the adults. By the end of his life, he spoke in such a soft, raspy voice that at times he seemed to be talking down to people. Well, in a way he was. And at his age, with all the lectures he had done, I guess I can't blame him. He had watched the world fall apart around him, and saw the beginnings of the decline of the Western Empire, due to our own greed. He spoke of this often, and urged people to be kinder, gentler, and wiser in their dealings in this world. Perhaps a pioneer of many ideas, still many others were passed down for centuries. He had a fascinating variety of material to draw from, and was a very worldly soul. He passed away at the age of 89, under somewhat controversial terms, but I will leave that for you to research. Many of his lectures are available on YouTube, and there are a lot. I think it's worth a listen. It may or may not be for you. The man inspired me in many ways to be a better person and take responsibility for my own situation. For that alone, I had to include him on my list. And finally, last but not least, we have Mr. Terence McKenna. What can I say about this man that's not already been said? You either know him well or have never heard of him. He was also a psychonaut of sorts during the 60s and 70s, and a pioneer in many ways. Born in 1946, he passed away in the year 2000, too early for this world. But in his time here, he shared some wonderful ideas about the world. He traveled to La Chorrera in the 70s with his brother Dennis in search of ayahuasca. They ended up taking mushrooms they found on the journey as well, and the rest is history. He wrote a book about it called True Hallucinations, which I read many years ago, and it was a very interesting book, and an interesting look into their time in the jungle. He wrote a lot about psychedelics and the mind, but where he really shined was speaking to a group of people. Terence was the epitome of a beatnik psychonaut, in my opinion, for lack of a better description. But the terms really do no justice to the man. He was a unique individual. He spoke with such eloquence and mystery, despite his speeches being a bit hard to listen to for some individuals. Once you've heard him speak, you never forget that voice. Interestingly, the same goes for both of the others I listed. Terence was convinced that psychedelics, such as psilocybin mushrooms and LSD, could change the world, and in some ways he reminded me of Timothy Leary in his adamant nature about the value and efficacy of these substances. He was the one who coined the term the hero dose to describe taking 5 grams of dried mushrooms, and once described smoking DMT as being shot out of a cannon to the moon. He was not far off on that one, in my opinion, but I digress. As with many of my heroes, the reasons are complicated for my interest in his work. It expands far beyond mere psychedelic research, as he was aware of the sciences of the body and mind, and explored many aspects of the psyche. Many times his language would come across as a jumble of New Age rambling, but on closer inspection, one could clearly see what he was trying to define. As one who has been interested in psychedelics for a few decades, I find his work was very detailed and immersed. And, as with all the others, I do not agree with all of his theories or ideas. I just listen and absorb them, and decide for myself whether or not they hold any weight. I would also like to mention one more inspiration I want to add to the list, to make 4 total. This is a person that helped me learn more about my own heart, and that was Ram Dass. He was born Richard Alpert. He was introduced to a guru in India in the 1960s during his psychedelic revolution and ended up a professor that quit his job and took a new approach to life. He was friends with Timothy Leary, but took a different approach in the years following. He was not purely focused on LSD, but rather used it as a catalyst for growth. In recent years, he has suffered a stroke, but he is still alive and well and posts videos on YouTube from time to time. He had the guru aura, but was humble enough to know to tell people to follow their own paths, not him. That is something I admire. There's something special about the man I cannot define. I will just leave it at that. I just wanted to share my experience because it helped me cope with confusion in a rough time in my life. These people are in no specific order, nor are they necessarily at the top of my list. I chose them for their unique nature and contribution to my own life and studies. There is an arrogance, yet a humility, with most of the people I find interesting. One needs a bit of variety in their life in order to hear out all sides of the issues that interest them. I could go ahead and write out a dozen or so authors that I think are heroes, or even a list of philosophers and scientists. But the unique nature and variety of these few I chose go deeper than just ideas. These people perhaps said the right thing at the right time, which can change our life direction in an instant. There are, of course, the heroes who reveal lies in the world, or whistleblowers that expose corruption, firefighters, mothers and fathers who stand up for those who cannot defend themselves, and these are important too. But they are a different kind of hero. They deserve a separate category. I just wanted to define that before anyone wonders why I chose these people in particular. These are my heroes in the category of mind, body, and spirit, if such things exist in any separate form. So thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any heroes, please leave a comment and share how they have helped you grow. There are many great teachers out there, and we can learn a lot from a little bit of observation. No one human has the whole story, so as long as we keep that in mind, we can avoid the pitfalls of believing anyone unconditionally. Alas, we are only facets of the jewel of creation. Not one holds the complete picture of life. We yearn for that one guru or leader that will bring us into the light, without bias or ill intent, and help us remove the confusion we wade through in daily life. But remember, they are just people, like you and I, seeking the same solace, the same comforts, and the same connections. People, born into the chaotic soup of this world, swimming the same river, riding the same currents. If we truly need comfort, we should take it from the fact that we exist at all, that each of us has lived no less rich and plentiful than another. Even the simplest mind with the simplest life has something to teach others if we are just willing to listen. Perhaps, of all the lives, these people would have the most to teach us in the least amount of words. Have a wonderful day, everyone.